Hi, good morning. I'm Sean Griffin. This is Morning Cup of Context. Thanks for joining me. I was reading this morning the scriptures and Matthew chapter 8, and there's a moment where Jesus heals a guy who had leprosy, and then he tells him to go and give the offerings prescribed by Moses to the priests as a testimony to them. And I just want to jump into that context real quick, and so people understand why Jesus would have told him that. Okay, it's Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4. It says, "When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, 'I am willing, be cleansed.' And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, 'See that you tell no one, but go, show yourself to the priest, and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them.'" Well, very interesting, okay? Because, how many times do we see in other parts of the gospel where Jesus healed somebody and then, he just said, "Your faith has made you well, go and sin no more." They were grateful, they went off in happiness and rejoiced, but he didn't tell them, "Hey, go show yourself to the priest." Well, that's because Yeshua, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, he kept the laws of God. He kept the commandments of God. And so he's actually encouraging this guy to keep a commandment. So, and this is where we understand Jesus did teach and practice the law of God, the commandments of God. John 15:10, and Jesus said, "If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love." So this is Jesus telling us right here, point blank, he keeps his Father's commandments. In John 8, 28 through 29, Jesus said, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and I do nothing on my own initiative, but I speak these things as the Father taught me. And he who sent me is with me, and he has not left me, for I always do the things that are pleasing to him." So he's telling us right here, he doesn't do anything on his own initiative, right? And there's other passages that says he only does what the Father tells him. And here he's saying that he's only done what the Father has taught him, which that's in the commandments of God, right? And Leviticus 14 is actually where we get the instructions in the law of God for when someone has leprosy, what to do. And what's interesting about this passage, okay, in Matthew 8, Jesus skips some steps, right? So he's still following the law, but when someone had leprosy, there was a kind of a process that you did. It wasn't just, first of all, I should say that the leprosy itself was curable, and that's something we have to understand, okay? But there was a process for that healing to occur, and it was a multiple step process, and I'm going to go over that in just a second. But here in Leviticus 14, it just kind of gives us this opening idea. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. Now he should be brought to the priest.'" Then, in Leviticus 14, 3 through 18, okay, the next 15 verses, there's a 4-stage treatment that's included in this idea. There's 3 different sacrifices. There's one in stage 2, and then there's 2 in stage 4. There's a sprinkling of blood. There's a shaving off of all body hair. The guy with leprosy has to wait till the 8th day to come back to the priest, present himself, and then they have to do a sacrifice. They take some of the blood, put it on the earlobe, the right thumb, and then the big toe on the right side of the body, and then there was more sacrifices, a grain offering, a burnt offering that took place, part of the guilt offering. So this idea, and then in 19 and 20, we see that the priest had made atonement for him, and then he's actually declared clean. So the priest shall next offer the sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from his uncleanness. Then afterward he shall slaughter the burnt offering. The priest shall offer up the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he will be clean. So these animals that were brought forward, this is the idea. This is when Jesus is saying in the first verse there, he's saying, give the gifts prescribed, commanded of Moses, to the priests as a testimony to them. And I think that a lot of people miss the idea that, the guy who had leprosy, and this is what Leviticus 14 explains in great detail throughout the whole chapter. I just don't have time to read it this morning in its entirety. But that's the big context there, is that they were to, the guy who had leprosy had to bring his own gifts for the slaughtering of the sacrifices, okay, for the guilt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the burnt offering, So he had to bring those, but if he couldn't afford those, there was secondary instructions that he just could bring some smaller things that cost less to own, some smaller birds and things, so he could bring less to make atonement. All right, so it even included the poor. So if you had leprosy and you were ostracized because people didn't want to be around you, possibly lost your job, you may not have a lot of money. So it was even a provision in God's merciful, loving instructions for mankind to still get this guy health care. Because that's what we're talking about, guys. We're talking about health care. It was an initial form of health care. This prescribed way you can be cleansed of this skin disease that isolated you from the rest of the community. And even if you didn't have a lot of money, you could still get health care. And I think that's pretty amazing. And that's what Jesus is saying, to go and present the offering that Moses commanded. But what's interesting is in Matthew 8, in the last verse, he says, as a testimony to them. And this is where we can possibly derive some conjecture. And I'm going to throw that up right up front that this is possible conjecture. But it's, to me, it reads as if Yeshua is almost saying, because everyone didn't believe him at the beginning, right? And many of them thought that he was teaching against the law of God. Right, because remember in Matthew 12 and other places, the Pharisees were questioning him about healing people on the Sabbath, right? And they didn't think he was keeping the law of God at all. They thought he was breaking it, even though he wasn't. And he explains that, and they don't have any grounds to contest him because they realize he's right. He never broke the law. This is why he's called sinless, right? He continued to keep the commandments throughout his entire life up into his crucifixion. And so it makes me think when he says to this guy, "Hey, go give the gifts of the offering prescribed by Moses to the priests as a testimony to them," just to let them, hey, he's basically saying, hey, Jesus healed me. I'm supposed to come give you these for the burnt offering, the grain offering, and Jesus has commanded me to do this, as if the Levites needed affirmation that here's this guy who's calling himself the Christ and healing everybody everywhere he goes. He's actually also fulfilling the law, which would help him pass the Deuteronomy 13 test, right? So it's almost like he's doing some outreach marketing in a way to let to help even the priests know at the temple that he's, sent by God, because that's how the prophet was attested to be sent by God. He was keeping the law of God and pointing others to the law of God, right? That's just one of the three ways. So it's interesting here that in this passage, there's, like I said at the beginning, there's a step that was skipped. So when we go over to Leviticus 14, it shows us, the entire chapter shows us that there was a process. Verses 3 through 18, like I'm putting up here on the screen, during this 4-stage treatment. This was a treatment that led up to verse 18 from these 15 verses for the man who had leprosy. Yeshua bypassed this treatment altogether and just healed him, right? That's why it was called a miracle. So this was a treatable skin condition through natural means, as explained in Leviticus 14, 3 through 18. But since Jesus healed this man miraculously and bypassed those steps, right, he still needed to fulfill the law to make atonement for the man to the priest, because all of it went through the priest. And that's very important. Why? Because Yeshua walked perfectly in the commandments of the law, and upon his resurrection, he's made a high priest in the Melchizedek order. So he has to fulfill the end part of this law, which is verses 19 and 20. To have this guy bring forth his grain offering and his burnt offering so that the priest can make atonement for him, and he's declared clean. So even though he was clean, right, Jesus cleaned him, he still wanted to go through the motions, above and beyond, if you will, to make sure that the priest knew, and which they, of course, would in turn easily have told the Pharisees, but to make sure the priest knew, and this guy knew, according to his good conscience, that he was doing the law right. All the P's and Q's were being taken care of, dotted I's, crossed T's. So he was being thorough. And I think that's really interesting because
I think it's time we address the elephant in the room.
This is the elephant in the room, guys. Whenever we see anyone in the scriptures that has leprosy and that Jesus is healing them of leprosy, we have to look back at Leviticus 14 and think about this for a moment. There was a prescribed treatment for someone with that kind of skin disease. They could have been healed already. So this is why Jesus is reprimanding the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, everyone during the day, the religious leaders of that day. They were not following the law. They were absconding the truth of the law with their man-made traditions. So this was an easy one. This was, if you had leprosy, here's the process. Come to the priest, we'll do the process, you'll be cleansed. But yet, Jesus is running around encountering people with leprosy. And they're not going to the priest, they're coming to him. Why? Why are they coming to him? It was just a simple 8-day process. They could have already been cured. So the point is, I'm saying we have multitude of other verses in the Gospels that tells us that Jesus was reprimanding them for not keeping the commandments. They were hypocrites about it. And that's why he was having to miraculously take care of things, but he still wanted to encourage. And that's why I say it could be a further testimony to the priests, possibly because they weren't doing the law. Because this guy could have already been healed. He didn't have to come to Jesus if the priests were doing the law. And teaching the law, teaching people, hey, you can be healed of leprosy. Come to us. We have a prescribed treatment by the Father, and we can do it. So I just think that's why the guy wasn't already healed. And that is why it's a testimony to the priest, to the man who was healed, and to us reading it in this day, that Yeshua did keep the commandments, and he called out the hypocrisy of those who weren't keeping the commandments. And all the while, the people that he was trying to speak the truth to, they received the benefit of him keeping the commandments. And so that's why God instructs us to be like Yeshua, to keep the commandments. Okay, guys? Thanks for joining us. I hope this helped with the context of that passage there. And if you like this video, like, share, and subscribe. Make sure to help me pass the word on to others who may benefit from these ideas of context. And go to our YouTube channel there. We also upload the videos there usually first. And they're a little easier to share than on Facebook sometimes. And like, share, and subscribe. Tap the bell so you're notified of new videos when they come out. And that way you can keep up with me. If you have anything that you think that's been taken out of context, that you've heard either preached, taught, or you yourself have thought, am I looking at the context of this properly or whatever, and you want to go over it or have me go over it, I'd be glad to look at it, and we can possibly do a video on it. So you're welcome to send me that in the comments if you like. Okay, guys, thanks for joining me, and I hope everyone has a good day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.